Platinum. Get into the power of platinum. Get a Panasonic Platinum.
It's Kool-Aid to the rescue!
Washes away your gray and washes in your own natural color.
Do you remember those simple, strange, everyday things? The ones that only made sense because they were just normal in the 80s? From curled up bologna to rewinding cassettes with a pencil, these ordinary moments shaped how we lived, played, and grew up. But looking back now, was normal ever really that simple? Riding your bike until the streetlights came on was just what you did. There was no need for texts or tracking apps. You just rode. You'd pedal down cracked sidewalks, over gravel driveways, and through whatever shortcuts you could find behind neighbors' houses. Some kids had banana seats, some had handlebar streamers, and some had bikes covered in duct tape, but they all worked just fine. Helmets were more rumor than rule, and if you scraped your knee, your mom slapped on some mercurochrome and told you to walk it off. You didn't worry about how far you went, just how much longer you had until the glow of those streetlights reminded you it was time to head home. That warm, orange light didn't just mean the day was ending, it meant the world around you was about to quiet down, and you still had one last race to win, one last hill to jump, one last loop around the cul-de-sac. There was a kind of freedom there that kids today might never know. You were unsupervised, a little sunburned, and completely alive. And when the lights finally blinked on and you raced home with the wind at your back, you weren't just a kid riding a bike. You were part of a world that trusted you to come back on your own. Being the television remote for your parents wasn't just normal. It was expected. If your dad wanted to flip from the news to the ball game, guess who had to get up and turn the dial? It didn't matter if you were already lying on the floor or halfway through your cereal. Turn it to Channel 5 meant get off the couch, walk across the shag carpet, and click that heavy knob with an audible clunk. No remotes, no complaints, just the sound of your parents' voice and the sound of obedience. Sometimes they'd want to see what else is on, and that meant standing there, turning the dial slowly, while the screen flickered and your hand started to cramp. It sounds silly now, but it taught you patience, or at least how to sigh without being heard. And when the picture got fuzzy, they'd call you again, this time to adjust the rabbit ears. The fact is, being the remote wasn't a chore. It was just part of the job description of being a kid. You learned the channels by heart, knew which knobs to jiggle, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you got to pick the next show. Looking back, it wasn't about the television. It was about how much control your parents trusted you with in a house where they made every decision. Using a pencil to rewind a cassette tape was a quiet kind of genius every 80s kid just understood. When the tape got chewed or the music stopped mid-song, you didn't panic. You grabbed a number 2 pencil, sharpened or not, and fit it snug into the reel. Then came the satisfying twist. One crank at a time, like some ancient combination lock you were decoding by hand. And it worked. Every time. You saved your tape, and more importantly, you saved yourself from getting yelled at for ruining it. Cassettes were fragile, and so were the rules around them. You didn't let someone borrow your favorite mix unless you trusted them with your life. And if they didn't rewind it before giving it back, well, that said something about who they were. The pencil trick wasn't flashy, but it was yours. A little secret weapon passed around lunch tables and sleepovers. You didn't think twice about it. It was normal, like trapper keepers and Walkmans and the sound of the tape deck slamming shut. These were the tools of your time. And sometimes, when the tape snapped for real and couldn't be saved, you didn't cry. You just started over. There was always another blank, another label to peel off, another playlist waiting to be made. Making forts out of the couch cushions felt like building your own world. You'd wait for that perfect moment, parents distracted, living room free, and then tear the whole thing apart. Every pillow, every blanket, every armrest was fair game. The couch didn't look like a couch anymore. It was a base, a hideout, a spaceship, or a castle. And you weren't just some kid messing up the furniture. You were an architect, a general, a dreamer with zero regard for adult logic. You made tunnels so tight you had to army crawl through. You used laundry baskets as chairs and flashlights for torches. And when the structure collapsed, and it always did, you rebuilt it better, stronger. Cushions braced against the coffee table, sheets anchored by encyclopedias. Every household rule was suspended inside that space. You could whisper, giggle, even bring snacks if you were careful. And when it got quiet, and you were lying on your stomach inside the dark, soft stillness of your homemade fort, you felt something no grown-up could quite understand. You felt safe and powerful, and completely at home in a world you built with your own hands. Taping songs off the radio was more than just recording music. It was chasing perfection. You'd sit with your finger on the record button, holding your breath, waiting for that first guitar riff to kick in. And just like that, you'd slam it down and hope the DJ kept quiet. But they never did. Half your tapes were filled with top 10 countdowns, weather reports, and station jingles you didn't ask for. Still, you kept going. Because owning that song, even in its imperfect, staticky form, meant something. It meant you cared enough to try. There was no Spotify, no streaming. Just patience, timing, and luck. You learned how to press pause at just the right moment, how to label your tapes with blocky handwriting and doodles, and how to rewind to your favorite part without stretching the tape. And when you played it back later, hearing your favorite song crash in right after a car commercial, it wasn't annoying. It was a memory. It was your version. And somehow, that made it even better. Using a wire hanger as a television antenna wasn't a hack, it was the plan. When the picture went fuzzy or the sound cut out during cartoons, nobody panicked. They grabbed the closest hanger, unwound it like a medieval tool, and twisted it onto the rabbit ears. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it made things worse. But that never stopped anyone from trying. You'd hold it up, wave it around, maybe even stand in a weird position just to keep the signal. And God help you if you moved and the picture went dark again. You didn't know why it worked. You just knew it did. That hanger, bent and taped and sticking out like a science experiment, turned Saturday mornings into Technicolor heaven. And if it fell behind the television, you fished it out and tried again. You didn't need fancy tech or cable subscriptions. You needed a coat hanger and determination. School lunch pizza was the eighth wonder of the world, half sponge, half soup, all memory. It came in a rectangular slice, always too hot or too cold, with cheese that somehow both slid off and refused to melt. The crust was doughy and thick, like it had second thoughts about becoming bread, and yet it was glorious. You looked forward to pizza day. You hoped for pizza day. And when you saw those beige plastic trays stacked with greasy rectangles, your heart leapt. It wasn't about the taste. It was about the ritual, the anticipation, the knowledge that for one brief, shining moment, lunch didn't completely suck. You'd eat it with a spork, chase it with chocolate milk, and still have sauce on your chin by the time recess rolled around. It was cafeteria survival, and somehow it felt like celebration. Drinking Kool-Aid made with half the sugar was like expecting magic and getting a slap. You'd watch your mom dump a bright packet into the pitcher, maybe grape, maybe tropical punch, and then pause. No cup of sugar, just a few sad spoonfuls and a whole lot of water. You knew right then it wasn't going to be good, but you drank it anyway, because it was cold, it was colorful, and it was yours, even if it tasted like medicine. Every neighborhood had that one kid whose family made it right, too sweet, like liquid candy. And you'd try to trade snacks just to get a sip. But back home, the lean version was the rule. That watery glass with ice cubes floating on top meant summer, meant thrift, meant doing the best you could with what you had. You didn't love it, but you understood it. And sometimes, on a hot day, that barely sweet drink still hit just right. Eating ice cream that was just a block of frozen vanilla was a rite of passage. No scoops, no swirls, no sprinkles. Just a hard, rectangular slab of off-white ice that came wrapped in cardboard and tasted vaguely of freezer. It took real effort to cut into it. You didn't scoop it, you sawed it. And if it had melted and refrozen a few times, that was just how it came. Still, when dessert time rolled around and your dad pulled out that paper-wrapped brick, your eyes lit up. Because it was ice cream. Because it was enough. You'd carve off a slice and plop it into a bowl, maybe pour some chocolate syrup on it if you were lucky. Sometimes you'd sandwich it between graham crackers. Other times you'd just gnaw at it until your teeth hurt. It was humble, plain, and perfect in the way that only a kid's dessert can be. Microwaving bologna until the edges curled was just science. Hungry kid science. You'd lay that pink circle on a paper towel, punch a few buttons, and watch as the edges lifted like petals on a sad little flower. The smell? Unmistakable. A kind of hot, salty nostalgia that clung to the air long after your snack was gone. Sometimes you'd eat it straight, hot and curled like a meaty chip. Other times you'd slap it on bread with mustard and call it lunch. It wasn't gourmet, it wasn't even good, but it filled the gap. And in those moments, staring into a microwave as your weird little experiment turned into a meal, you felt resourceful, independent. Like maybe you didn't need a grown-up to make something after all. Wearing tube socks pulled up to your knees was never questioned. It was the look. Thick white cotton with colored stripes at the top, like you were either headed to gym class or about to compete in the Olympics. They weren't just socks. They were part of the uniform for growing up in the 80s. You'd pull them up so high they practically touched your shorts, which, by the way, were usually too short and too shiny. You didn't wear them ironically. You wore them because that was what everyone wore. They were warm, they stayed up, and they made your skinny legs look like candy canes in gym shoes. Some kids folded them down. Some doubled them up. But if you really wanted to show off, you made sure those stripes were visible from across the blacktop. And when they got dirty, you kept wearing them anyway. Nobody did laundry every other day. You just wore them until they got stiff, then maybe swapped them out for another pair from the drawer, if you had one. They made your calves itch, they left a line across your skin, and they were absolutely essential. Looking back, it wasn't about fashion. It was about belonging. Every kid had a drawer full of them, even if that drawer was just an old shoebox. Wearing every piece of winter clothing you owned at once wasn't a joke. It was survival. If your mom said it was cold, you didn't argue. You layered. Turtleneck, sweater, coat, gloves inside mittens, hat under hood, and snow pants that made you waddle like a duck. You couldn't bend your arms, you couldn't scratch your face, you could barely breathe. But you were warm. Or at least, your mom believed you were, and that was good enough. You'd stand at the door sweating while she zipped, buttoned, and snapped everything in place. You looked like you were preparing to climb Everest, but all you were doing was walking to the school bus. Half the time, the layers didn't match. Bright colors, mismatched mittens, scarves that trailed like tails. None of it mattered. The goal was simple. Do not freeze. And when you finally got to school and had to take it all off, it was like peeling an onion. Layers and layers and layers. You'd hang it on your hook, but it always ended up in a wet heap on the floor. Still, you did it all again the next day, because winter in the 80s didn't care how ridiculous you looked, it just cared if you made it out the door. Wearing hand-me-downs from cousins you barely knew was practically a rite of passage. One day, a garbage bag full of clothes would show up in your living room, and suddenly, your wardrobe had changed. You didn't get to choose what was in it. You just got told, try these on. Some of it fit, some of it didn't. Some of it smelled like attic. But it was yours now. There'd be shirts with names you didn't recognize sewn into the tags, pants with grass stains from someone else's summer, and every so often, a piece so uncool you considered pretending it got lost at school. But you wore it, because it was free, because it still worked, and because making a fuss wasn't really an option. You might not have liked it, but you understood it. That was just the deal. Clothes got passed down and down again, and in a weird way, it made you feel connected to cousins you only saw at weddings or holiday parties. You'd spot a picture of them in the same jacket years earlier, and it felt like history. It felt like your life had chapters. It wasn't about style. It was about stretching what you had and learning to make it work. Bright yellow or orange pants weren't a fashion statement. They were a survival tool for parents. You couldn't get lost in them if you tried. Whether you were running around a park, darting through a store, or disappearing into a crowd at the mall, those pants made sure someone could spot you from a mile away. They were loud, they were borderline blinding, and they were just part of the uniform for childhood. You might have hated them, begged not to wear them, even tried to accidentally stain them. But every time they came out of the dryer, there they were again, neon, wrinkle-free, and impossible to miss. They were made from some indestructible fabric that never faded, never tore, and never let you hide. You'd run around with your friends, hoping no one would say anything, but they did. "Nice pants," someone would laugh, and you'd shrug, knowing there was no comeback. These pants weren't cool. They were practical. They were for grown-ups who wanted peace of mind. And even if you felt like a traffic cone, you also kind of felt safe, because someone always knew exactly where you were. Calling the movie theater for showtimes was the original weekend ritual. You'd sit by the corded phone, maybe with a piece of paper and a pen, and dial the number from the newspaper ad. And then you'd wait. A robotic voice would slowly list off every movie title and time, and if you missed it, you had to wait through the entire message again. No fast forward, no website, no app. Just patience. Sometimes you'd try writing it down, but your pen would run out, or your sibling would be yelling in the background. And if the line was busy, you kept redialing, hoping the next call would go through. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then, it was just how things worked. You didn't complain. You listened carefully, made your plan, and begged your parents for a ride. And when the movie finally started and the lights went down, it all felt worth it. Because you earned that seat. With a pen, a phone, and a little bit of luck. Saving wrapping paper after birthdays wasn't weird, it was responsible. After the candles were blown out and the last present was opened, your mom or grandma would swoop in like a hawk, gently peeling tape from corners and flattening out every piece. "Don't rip it," she'd say, before you even started. And if you forgot, you got the look. Some families folded it, others rolled it. But no matter what, it ended up in a drawer or under a bed, waiting to be used again. You'd sit on the floor watching them smooth each sheet like it was gold. Sometimes you tried to help, but your folds weren't crisp enough. There were certain papers you saw every year, balloons, teddy bears, tiny cakes, and they became part of the birthday itself. One sheet even had a rip taped over from 3 years back, and everyone remembered who caused it. It didn't matter if the corners were wrinkled or the pattern was faded. The magic was in the effort, not the shine. When it came time to wrap someone else's gift, you dug through that stash like it was a treasure chest. And finding the perfect size scrap always felt like winning. You'd see the same wrapping paper come back year after year, first on your birthday, then your brother's, then your cousin's baby shower. It became a kind of family heirloom, with little creases and scotch tape scars that told its story. It wasn't just about saving money, though that mattered. It was about not wasting what still had use. And as a kid, you learned to appreciate that. You saw the effort in reusing, in preserving. And maybe, just maybe, you learned to open presents a little more carefully. Tupperware, that was really an old Cool Whip container, was the standard, not the exception. You'd open the fridge hoping for dessert, and instead find leftover spaghetti in a container labeled whipped topping. It was a betrayal you learned to live with. Your kitchen was full of reused tubs, sour cream, margarine, even old deli meat containers stacked like puzzle pieces in the cabinet. Every family had their favorite, the one container that somehow never cracked or stained. You'd swear it still smelled faintly of mashed potatoes no matter what was in it. Sometimes the lid didn't match, but you jammed it on anyway and hoped for the best. At school, other kids opened their lunchboxes to brand-name plastic, but yours said, "I can't believe it's not butter." If someone threw one out by mistake, there was a household manhunt to retrieve it. Your parents would point out how wasteful real Tupperware was anyway. And honestly, they weren't wrong. Those little tubs may not have been fancy, but they were tough. They didn't match, they didn't seal that well, and they always had a faint smell no matter how many times you washed them. But they worked. They were used for everything from packing lunches to freezing soup. And heaven help the kid who threw one away thinking it was trash. These containers weren't disposable. They were part of the system. When you saw one in the fridge, you didn't judge it. You just hoped it held something good. Rinsing and reusing plastic sandwich bags was practically a family rule. After lunch, you didn't toss the bag. You turned it inside out, rinsed it under the tap, and draped it over the faucet to dry. Sometimes you'd clip it to a hanger. Sometimes you'd just prop it in a cup. It wasn't glamorous, but it got the job done. Some of them had names written in marker that never fully came off. Others had little tears taped over, giving them another day of use. You could tell the older bags by how soft and crinkly they felt. Eventually, the zipper stopped working and they became snack bags instead. When those wore out, they became parts bins for screws, coins, or tiny game pieces. Nothing in your house got just one job. Even sandwich bags had a retirement plan. And watching them dry on the counter felt as normal as seeing a dish rack. The bags would get a little cloudy over time, the corners frayed, the seal a little less sticky, but they still held your sandwich, still kept your crackers dry. And that was enough. You learned that things didn't have to be perfect to still be useful. You didn't think of it as cheap. You thought of it as smart. Because in a house where money mattered, nothing went to waste, not even a plastic bag. Shampooing with whatever was under the sink was not unusual. It was survival. One week you had actual shampoo. The next, dish soap or baby wash, or something labeled conditioning rinse in a bottle that hadn't been sold since 1978. You didn't ask questions. You just got your hair wet and made it work. Sometimes it stung your eyes. Sometimes it left your hair squeaky. There were nights when all you had was bar soap and you made do. Sometimes you mixed products together like a mad scientist just to stretch them. That blue dish soap had no business smelling that good, and it got the grease out. You didn't worry about sulfates or frizz control. You worried about whether your sister used the last of it. Some bottles had cracked caps taped shut. Others were sticky from years of being handled with wet hands. It wasn't fancy, but you came out clean. And honestly, that was enough, but it was all part of the game. You used what you had, and you moved on. You didn't need a 10-step routine or salon brands. You needed suds and warm water. And if your mom caught you using the good stuff, you got a lecture about wasting it. Looking back, it wasn't about hygiene. It was about learning how to adapt, how to make do, how to live with close enough and call it clean. Sleeping in the living room because only one room had a heater was just winter in an old house. The bedrooms were freezing, the hallway was worse. But the living room, with its one vent or maybe a space heater, was a haven. So you'd drag your blankets, maybe your siblings too, and make a pile on the carpet. It became a nest of quilts and couch cushions. You'd fall asleep to the sound of late-night television or your parents whispering at the kitchen table. Sometimes the heater clicked and buzzed. Sometimes it gave off that warm metal smell that meant it was working too hard. You could hear the hum all night and somehow found comfort in it. Everyone had a designated spot, even the dog. There'd be fights over who got the thickest blanket. And once the lights went out, there were always giggles, whispers, and someone inevitably getting shushed. Sometimes your dad would leave early in the morning and tuck you in without saying a word. Other times you woke up with your mom draped over half the couch, still in her bathrobe. The living room wasn't just a warm space, it was a gathering place. For a few cold months, it became your shared bedroom, your campfire, your shelter. But you were grateful. Because in that one room, you could breathe without seeing your breath. It wasn't ideal, but it was warm. And when you woke up, wrapped like a burrito next to your sister or your dog, you didn't think of it as uncomfortable. You thought of it as home. Putting duct tape over holes in the couch was not some clever life hack. It was just how you kept furniture alive a little longer. The fabric would wear out, sometimes from years of kids sliding off the arms like jungle gym poles, sometimes just from age and use. One day the stuffing would start to poke through, a little fluff at first, like a warning. Then it would widen into a tear. That's when the roll of duct tape came out of the junk drawer. Thick, silver, industrial-strength tape that fixed everything from cracked toys to leaky hoses, and now your couch. You'd flatten the cushion best you could, then stretch a strip across the hole like a badge of survival. If the rip got bigger, you added more strips. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. You'd run your hand over the new patch, knowing it wasn't soft anymore, but it was solid. And that was enough. Your guests didn't comment. They had couches like that too. It was normal to have mismatched throw pillows, a quilt draped over the back, and one side of the couch permanently indented from your dad sitting in the same spot every night. Duct tape didn't embarrass you. It reminded you that grown-ups didn't throw things out if they still had some life in them. It told you that usefulness always mattered more than appearance. The couch wasn't ruined, it was lived in. And that made it feel like home. Making toys out of empty toilet paper rolls and tape was less about being crafty and more about being a kid with nothing else to do. You didn't have the latest action figure? No problem. You had scissors, masking tape, and a couple of cardboard tubes. One minute they were swords, the next they were binoculars or walkie-talkies or rocket boosters taped to your arms. Add some crayons and a few scraps of paper, and you could build an entire universe from what other people called trash. These weren't Pinterest projects or Instagram-ready masterpieces. They were lopsided, crooked, and full of heart. And they kept you busy for hours. You learned how to fold things, tape them together, cut out little windows, or color flames at the bottom of your jetpack. The roll itself was just a starting point. The real toy was whatever your imagination decided it was that day. Even the tape dispenser felt like a tool of invention. Running out of tape meant your mission was over. You didn't think in terms of store-bought or homemade. You just wanted something that made you feel like a creator. And when your parents saw what you'd made, they didn't laugh. They smiled, maybe snapped a picture and said, "That's pretty good." Because they knew what you were doing wasn't just play. It was practice. For making do. For thinking different. For turning nothing into something. Taping torn book covers with Scotch tape was just part of keeping your favorites together. You'd open a book too fast, or it had already been through 3 older siblings, and suddenly the cover would be hanging on by a thread, or not at all. You didn't panic. You went to the drawer, pulled out that little plastic dispenser with the cloudy tape, and did your best. You'd line up the edge of the cover, press it back against the binding, and run the tape over it, hoping it would hold. Sometimes the tape wrinkled. Sometimes it didn't stick quite right. But you weren't trying to make it look new. You were just trying to make it last. That book meant something. Maybe it was a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web, or a Garfield comic book you'd read 100 times. Maybe it was a school textbook you were terrified to turn in damaged. Whatever it was, you believed it deserved another shot. And so the tape became a kind of badge, a sign that this book had been loved, that it had lived a little. Even if the edges turned yellow or the corners curled, that glossy strip across the spine told a story all its own. You could always spot the books that had been repaired, the ones that looked like they'd been patched up after battle. And maybe that's what they were, survivors. Of backpacks, bathtubs, and being read under the covers with a flashlight. Patching jeans with iron-on knee pads was less about style and more about hanging on to the clothes you had. When your jeans ripped at the knees, and they always did, it wasn't a reason to throw them away. It was time to fix them. You'd go to the store or dig through the sewing box and find those little denim patches that came in packs. Some were square, some oval, all slightly darker or lighter than the jeans they were meant to fix. You'd peel off the back, place them just right, then press with a hot iron and a dish towel so you didn't scorch the fabric. The smell was a mix of steam, glue, and old cotton. And just like that, the jeans were good as new, sort of. You could still see the outline, the way the fabric wrinkled around the edges. But no one cared. It meant those jeans had stories. It meant they'd been worn while playing tag, climbing fences, or crawling under porches looking for lost toys. Iron-on patches weren't a fashion statement. They were a family strategy, a way to keep clothes going just a little bit longer. And when you wore them to school, no one pointed or teased. Everyone had patched jeans. It was part of being a kid, part of growing up in a time when you didn't replace things, you fixed them. Even if the patch didn't match, it still did its job. And that was what mattered most. Putting cardboard in your shoes when the soles wore out was just something you did when money was tight. The bottoms would get soft, then thin, and one day, wet. You'd step in a puddle, and the water would go straight to your sock. That's when your dad would grab an old cereal box, cut out the shape of your foot, and tuck it inside your shoe like it was the most normal thing in the world. Sometimes the cardboard held up for a week, sometimes a day, but it made a difference. Your feet were dry, at least for a little while. The shoes might have looked fine on the outside, but you knew what was underneath, and you didn't say much about it. Neither did your friends, because chances were they had cardboard in theirs too. It wasn't a secret. It was just survival. A quiet, unspoken sign that families were doing the best they could with what they had. You learned to walk carefully, to avoid puddles, to hope it didn't rain. And when it did, you dried your socks on the radiator and slipped in a new piece. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And years later, when you could finally afford new shoes without holes, you never forgot how they once felt. How a piece of cardboard stood between you and the ground, and how, somehow, that made you feel stronger. Drinking and floating on rivers without life jackets was summer at its most carefree and most dangerous. You grabbed a giant black inner tube, packed a cooler full of beer, and drifted with your friends down slow-moving waters for hours. No one wore a life jacket, most could barely swim, but it was never about safety. It was about the sun, the music, and the freedom to float with no responsibilities. Some tied their tubes together. Others threw a rope to a canoe hauling more drinks. The river became a party, and the risks were part of the fun. You might remember falling out and laughing, feet searching for the rocky bottom, arms flailing before someone pulled you back in. Today, alcohol use while floating or boating is strictly monitored. Life jackets are required for anyone under a certain age in most states, and adults can face citations, or worse, for ignoring safety laws. But in the 1980s, there was no lecture, no patrol, just a lazy current and a long afternoon. And while the river taught you how to stay afloat, the classroom taught something entirely different, often with a wooden paddle. Let us talk about the rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then, you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory-making. The name says it all, rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. Max Headroom was supposed to be the future, a computer-generated, sarcastic television host who stuttered stylishly and wore sunglasses at night. He was the face of a dystopian digital world, equal parts cyberpunk icon and artificial intelligence with an attitude. Advertisers loved him, especially soda companies. So someone had the bright idea, let us give him a full television series. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. The Max Headroom show was visually interesting but narratively confusing. It tried to blend science fiction with satire, wrapped in glitchy editing and background noise. Most of the time, you were not sure if the show was broken or just being artsy. The plotline featured underground hackers, corrupt corporations, and a bleak media landscape, which ironically kind of predicted the internet. And Max, once a futuristic face of advertising, became more of a trivia answer at bar night. Still, his influence stuck around in weird ways. You can spot traces of Max Headroom in everything from video game villains to pop music videos. And if you thought that was sensory overload, wait until we talk about the time theaters tried to make movies smell like real life. Polyester leisure suits were loud, shiny, and unapologetically bold. They were not just clothing, they were a state of mind. Wearing one meant you were not afraid to stand out, to sweat a little, to dance a lot. These suits shimmered under disco lights, turned heads at the roller rink, and clung to your every move. They were not comfortable, they were not breathable, but they were unforgettable. The cut was wide, the collars were wider, and the colors ranged from banana cream to burnt orange. Every department store carried them. Every television dad had one. Every uncle wore one to a wedding. They were like armor for extroverts, flashy, fearless, and fun. You were not blending in, you were making an entrance before you even opened your mouth. They were the uniform of a generation trying to find cool in chaos, and for a brief window, they were it. Today, they are costume shop punchlines, but they once made people feel slick, sharp, and modern. They were part rebellion, part performance, part polyester fantasy. Why did we ever let go of a style that dared us to be this loud on purpose? Hitchhiking was once seen as adventurous, not reckless. People stuck out their thumbs with a smile and a sign, hoping for a ride and maybe a story. Soldiers on leave, college students on break, wanderers with a dream, they all relied on the kindness of strangers. Roads were filled with possibilities, and nobody thought twice about pulling over. You might remember watching someone hop into a stranger's car and wave goodbye, trusting the road and the driver. It was how many got from one town to the next, especially before cheap bus fares and ride-sharing apps. Parents might warn you to be careful, but that was the extent of the worry. Hitchhiking was not illegal in most places. It was resourceful. Over time, though, stories of assaults, disappearances, and crimes changed the narrative. Laws tightened. Signs went up, no hitchhiking. Now, in many states, it is restricted or outright banned. The open road closed itself off. Hitchhiking became a symbol of risk rather than freedom. But for those who once stuck out their thumb and caught a ride with a stranger, it still lives in memory as a gesture of trust. And just as strangers were trusted, so were quiet children waiting patiently in cars, alone. Because in 1969, Pan American Airlines launched a waiting list for commercial flights to the moon. No joke. People were lining up to get their names on this list. The idea was simple. We made it to the moon, so the next logical step was to sell tickets. Over 90,000 people signed up, excited about the idea of sipping martinis in zero gravity and watching the Earth rise outside their window. And Pan Am treated it like a real thing. They issued membership cards, called it the First Moon Flights Club, and promised that when the day came, they would call. The only problem? There was no plan, no actual timeline, no spaceship. It was a publicity stunt that spiraled out of control. People bought into the dream hard, and Pan Am was not about to correct them. When the company went bankrupt in the 1980s, it had never even started building anything to take people to space. The dream fizzled out, but it proved just how hungry the world was for a taste of the future. And nowhere was that hunger more obvious than in people's homes, where they tried to bring cinema magic to life with a machine the size of a small refrigerator. Candy cigarettes marketed to children were everywhere, in toy aisles, convenience stores, and party favors. They came in thin white boxes designed to look just like real cigarette packs. The candies themselves were chalky white sticks, sometimes with red tips to mimic a burning ember. You held them between your fingers like the grown-ups did. You exhaled imaginary smoke. Some even puffed out a sugar dust cloud when you blew through them. It was playful, innocent, and a little rebellious. Parents bought them without hesitation. Adults laughed when kids imitated their smoking habits. But behind the joke was something darker, an early conditioning that said cigarettes were cool, normal, expected. By the time health campaigns ramped up and smoking was linked to cancer in the public consciousness, the backlash began. Candy cigarettes became symbols of how early the tobacco industry's influence started. Today, they are banned or heavily restricted in many places. Major manufacturers stopped making them altogether. But for those who grew up in the 1980s, they are a memory of imitation that turned, for many, into addiction. And if what kids were putting in their mouths raised concerns, so did what they were playing with, because some of it was covered in poison paint. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting. Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. The VCR, a marvel that arrived in the 1970s, was akin to a magician in a box, granting us the power to capture time itself. Suddenly, TV schedules no longer dictated our lives. We could record, rewind, and relive our favorite moments at will. The VCR was the herald of home cinema, a concept so revolutionary that even its hefty price tag couldn't dampen its allure. It's a testament to its impact that phrases like "be kind, rewind" are etched in the collective memory of a generation. As DVDs and streaming services emerged, the VCR's star faded, but its legacy of shaping family movie nights and introducing the world to video rentals lives on. Soul Train was not just a television show, it was a movement in motion, and every Saturday morning it danced straight through your living room. It did not matter where you lived or what you had. If you turned on the television and saw that bright kaleidoscopic set and heard the beat drop, you were part of something electric. It brought soul, funk, disco, and joy into millions of homes, giving black culture the spotlight it long deserved. The fashion was wild and beautiful. The dancers were bold and free. It was not choreographed. It was felt. Soul Train lines were legendary because they turned the spotlight on the everyday person. It was joy on tape, beamed straight into a nation that often forgot how good it felt to dance. Even the silence after an episode ended felt louder somehow. Anyone with the courage to move could step forward. It gave kids in small towns the chance to see a world bigger, louder, and more alive than anything they had known. For many, it was the first time they saw themselves reflected on screen, not just as background, but as the show. Now, it is tucked away in archives, replaced by algorithm-fed clips and sterile edits. But once, it was pure. Once, it was fire. And once, it told a generation, you matter, and your rhythm belongs. What happens when the music that moved a generation fades into silence? No seatbelt use was not just common, it was practically invisible. Cars came with seatbelts, but they were rarely used. Children piled into the back seat without a second thought, curling up with pillows, playing games, or hanging their heads out the window like golden retrievers. On long trips, siblings would wrestle or lie down to nap across the entire back row. Adults, too, often left their belts untouched, especially in the front passenger seat. The seatbelt light was just an annoying feature, easily ignored. There were no alarms, no relentless dings, just silence and freedom. Many people viewed seatbelts as unnecessary unless they were driving fast or on highways. Some even believed they were more dangerous during crashes. It was not until the late 1980s and early 1990s that states began to enforce seatbelt laws. Today, it is a non-negotiable. Not buckling up can cost you money, your license, or your child's safety. But back then, you were more likely to get in trouble for forgetting to bring home milk than for not wearing a belt. And if the roads were that casual, imagine how carefree kids were on their bikes, zooming through neighborhoods without a helmet in sight. Speaking of things built right into the house, you are not going to believe what kind of doors were hiding inside the walls. for your milk. Picture this. You wake up, walk to the side of your kitchen, and open a tiny little door built right into your house. Behind it, a bottle of fresh milk, cool and ready to pour, maybe even some butter or cream depending on the day. No, it is not magic. That was the milk door, also called a milk chute. These small pass-through compartments were genius in their simplicity. One side opened from the outside, where the milkman would quietly place the day's delivery. The other opened from inside the house, so you never had to go out in your slippers or bathrobe. It was the drive-through window before there were drive-thrus. These doors were more than convenient. They were a sign that the world once ran on a shared rhythm. Everyone knew when the milkman came by. You could even leave payments or notes inside. Some had little shelves, others had insulation. And most people never locked them, because who would steal milk? Of course, once grocery stores and home refrigeration became widespread, the milk door quietly disappeared, sealed up, painted over, or just forgotten. But somewhere out there, behind layers of drywall, a few still exist. Hidden time capsules. The chatter telephone by Fisher-Price was more than a toy. It was a rite of passage. Long before smartphones and screen time, toddlers dragged this smiling, wide-eyed friend behind them like a badge of growing up. It clacked as it rolled, its rotary dial spinning with every giggle and grab. Children pretended to make calls, mimicking parents with absolute seriousness, pressing plastic receivers to their ears and speaking into the world. It was not electronic. It made no real calls, but it was powerful. Because it gave kids something adults had: control, conversation, importance. It was not just play, it was practice. With every pretend conversation, a child rehearsed how to be heard. Every child who played with it was rehearsing a future where they would matter. The clicking eyes, the ringing bell, the chunky plastic body, it was built to survive anything. And most did. Decades later, many are still found in attics, dusted with time but still smiling. For a generation, the chatter telephone was the first introduction to technology, play, and imagination, long before those things were ever separate. Why does one of our earliest toys still feel more human than the phones we carry today? Leaving kids in the car while you shopped was not only common, it was considered efficient parenting. You would crack the window a little, toss a snack in the back seat, and tell them not to touch the gear shift. That was it. No seat warmers, no climate control, just the burning hot vinyl seats and a juice box to keep them busy. You would run into the grocery store, the post office, maybe even the mall, and come back 20 minutes later like it was nothing. Sometimes the kid was asleep, sometimes reading, sometimes playing with the door locks like it was a game. There were no viral videos or angry phone calls to the authorities. People assumed kids were tougher back then, or maybe they just really trusted that nothing would go wrong. Sure, you would get the occasional warning to not talk to strangers through the car window, but that was the extent of it. It was all part of the era's free-range approach to parenting. And while the kids were stuck in the car, the adults, they were likely sneaking a break of their own, somewhere smoky and very much on school property. It looked like a cabinet, just a little rectangle in the wall with a tiny knob. But open it up and suddenly you had an ironing board swinging down like a Murphy bed for your clothes. Fold-out ironing boards in the wall were the peak of space-saving genius. These things were especially popular in mid-century homes, when every inch of space had to count. The board folded out flat, usually right next to the laundry area or inside the kitchen pantry. You did not have to drag a heavy metal contraption from the closet. Just pop it open, plug in the iron, and get to work. Some even had a tiny shelf or built-in plug to hold the iron itself, along with a little light above the board. Now that was fancy. Housewives adored these because they made chores quicker. And let's face it, they just looked slick. Like the house was in on the secret with you. Eventually, though, as trends moved toward larger laundry rooms and portable everything, these ironing stations disappeared. But for the folks who grew up with one, there is a real nostalgia there. It was like opening a secret door into domestic life. Now, speaking of secret doors, the next one was not about cleaning your shirt. It was about making sure your closet smelled like the forest. Children riding in the front seats of cars was an everyday sight, and often a point of pride. Sitting up front made you feel older, more important. You got to fiddle with the radio, point at road signs, and chat with mom or dad like a co-pilot. No one thought about airbags because there were not any. Booster seats were rare, and height limits did not exist. Some kids were barely out of diapers, sitting inches from the windshield. It was not defiance, it was just convenience. Parents wanted to keep an eye on you, or maybe you just begged until they said yes. You might remember leaning over to see the map or falling asleep with your head against the door. Today, it is illegal in many states for children under a certain age or weight to ride in the front seat. Airbags are now both a safety feature and a reason for strict backseat policies. But back then, the rules were unspoken and the risks were invisible. And if you think sitting up front was bold, try remembering what they used to hand to kids on the 4th of July. Explosives in a paper bag. There was something magical about the way the old telephone sat in its little nook. Not on a table, not hanging on a wall like we see in movies, but placed neatly in a purpose-built cubby carved right into the wall itself. These were telephone niches, and they were as common as house keys back in the day. You would see them in hallways, right outside the kitchen, or even tucked near the staircase, with a tiny shelf for the family phone book. Yes, an actual book. And maybe a little drawer for pens, paper, or the odd scribbled message. These spaces were like the beating heart of the house's social life. It is where gossip was whispered, news was broken, and the kids begged their parents to let them stay out late. Today, it is hard to imagine building a wall just for a phone, but back then, it was a sign of class and convenience. The sound of that rotary ring echoed through the whole house, and whoever answered it first? Well, that was usually the person who got stuck taking the message for everyone else. It is a slice of life that simply does not exist anymore, but it lived, loud and proud, in homes all across America. It looked like something straight out of a haunted dollhouse and somehow got greenlit as a beauty product. The Rejuvenate face mask promised younger, firmer skin through electrical muscle stimulation, which is a fancy way of saying it zapped your face with little shocks. Advertised by a former soap opera star, the mask wrapped around your head like a plastic exoskeleton and turned your facial routine into something that felt like a scene from a horror film. The idea was that the stimulation would tone your face like a gym tones your body, but customers mostly reported mild burns, numbness, and the distinct feeling that they had made a terrible mistake. Despite airing on television with the enthusiasm of a late-night miracle cure, it flopped hard. It was the kind of product that felt less like a beauty tool and more like a sci-fi movie prop that somehow escaped the set. Still, you had to admire the ambition. If you could survive the Rejuvenate, surely you could survive anything the 1980s had to throw at you. And as it turns out, that next throw was straight at the kids, because someone thought gym fashion should start in elementary school. Shag carpeting was not just floor covering, it was a lifestyle choice. You did not walk across it, you sank into it. It came in colors no one had ever seen in nature: burnt orange, mustard yellow, electric blue, and it stretched wall to wall, daring you to find the floor beneath. Every house in the 1970s seemed to have it, and every child seemed to lose at least one toy inside it. It muffled footsteps. It held warmth. It made every room feel like a sunken lounge. Lying down on shag was like being hugged by the room itself. It made even silence feel plush. But shag had a downside. It trapped dust. It collected everything. It was impossible to clean. And yet, for all that, it felt luxurious, decadent, soft under bare feet during cartoons and cereal mornings. It was carpeting with an opinion. Now we look back and laugh at it. But once, it was a dream realized in fabric form. Why did we trade comfort that bold for floors that whisper and forget? The floppy disk, a cornerstone of early personal computing, emerged in the late 1960s, symbolizing the first foray into portable digital storage. When the 3.5-inch floppy was introduced, many pondered, who would ever need that much storage? A notion that now elicits a chuckle in our gigabyte-saturated age. The act of inserting a floppy disk, accompanied by its characteristic click, defined an era of computing in the 80s and 90s. Despite its obsolescence due to advancing storage technologies, the floppy disk endures in the digital lexicon, immortalized as the universal save file icon. This subtle homage serves as a nostalgic reminder of the disk's pivotal role in the evolution of data storage and management. It is one of those things you barely notice until it slides into action: pocket doors. Unlike the typical swinging door, pocket doors vanish into the wall when opened, like a magic trick you can walk through. They were the height of clever home design in the mid-20th century, especially in homes that wanted a clean, modern look without bulky doors breaking up the space. You would find them separating dining rooms from kitchens or closing off formal living rooms when company arrived. Over time, though, they became a pain. The tracks jammed, the rollers squeaked, and once one went off its rail, good luck fixing it without tearing open the wall. Slowly, builders turned back to swing doors, and pocket doors became a quirky throwback. But if those walls could talk, they would whisper about family dinners, polite goodbyes, and the satisfaction of sliding a whole room out of sight. Now, speaking of questionable style choices, wait until we step into the softest, strangest room in the house: the bathroom. Sunbathing with baby oil and reflectors was the ultimate summer ritual. You lay out in the backyard, on the roof, or at the beach, armed with nothing but a bottle of Johnson's baby oil and a silver reflector under your chin. The goal? Tan fast, tan deep, and tan dark. The shine from the oil made your skin sizzle, and the reflector bounced rays straight into your face like a heat lamp. Everyone did it. Magazines encouraged it. Tan lines were a badge of honor, peeling skin a minor inconvenience. Sunscreen, if it was used at all, was barely SPF 4. People believed a good tan was healthy. Doctors warned of sunburn, but nobody listened. Today, dermatologists beg patients to stop tanning, and laws limit tanning bed access for minors. The link between ultraviolet exposure and skin cancer is undeniable. But back then, summer meant bronze skin and beach bodies, no matter the cost. Sunburns turned into tans, blisters were shrugged off, and if the oil left you red and raw, you did it again the next day. The danger came slowly. Just like another invisible risk, many families kept right next to the medicine cabinet, in a tiny glass stick filled with mercury. Back in the days when phones had cords and privacy was a privilege, every hallway had a throne, and it was called the gossip bench. This was not just a chair. It was a hybrid masterpiece, a small wooden seat attached to a side table, designed specifically for long, dramatic phone calls. These benches were often placed right by the hallway phone nook, and if you were a teenager in the 1960s or 1970s, this was your favorite spot in the house. You would sit there for hours, twirling the phone cord, whispering about crushes, repeating, "No, you hang up," while your siblings paced in the background waiting for their turn. Some benches had a little drawer for pens and paper. Others had cushions and floral fabric, showing just how serious folks were about comfort during those marathon chats. It was furniture that served one purpose: conversation. But as phones got smaller, and then wireless, and then fit in your pocket, the gossip bench faded away. Today, they are vintage novelties. Back then, they were the nerve center of the household. And while you chatted away about school dances or new neighbors, something else might have been happening overhead. Quietly, from the ceiling, playing your favorite song. Imagine this. It is Sunday morning. You are eating breakfast, and faintly from above your head comes the sweet hum of big band music or the evening news. The Garbage Pail Kids movie is the textbook example of a terrible idea being taken way too seriously. The trading cards were already controversial. Gross-out humor, exaggerated features, bodily functions turned into punchlines. But they were iconic. So naturally, someone decided to turn them into a full-length feature film. And it was a mess. The characters were played by little people in horrifying animatronic masks that barely moved, giving every scene a nightmarish vibe. The plot? A vague attempt at a coming-of-age story with elements of science fiction and slapstick comedy, all of it soaked in questionable effects and even worse acting. Even die-hard fans of the Cards walked out of theaters feeling like they had just lost a piece of their childhood. Critics called it one of the worst films ever made, and audiences agreed. It tanked at the box office, vanished from theaters, and was quietly swept under the rug. The only thing this movie managed to accomplish was proving that not all nostalgia belongs on the big screen. But if you think that was a bitter taste, just wait until we talk about a candy bar that tried to be classy and ended up at the bottom of the vending machine. If any of this felt familiar or just made you smile, drop your favorite memory in the comments. Tap like so more folks find us, and hit subscribe to keep this time machine running.